A teenager in North Dakota was leaving a street dance party. He noticed someone was following him. A 41-year-old man named Shannon Brandt rammed him with his vehicle, running him over and killing him. He admitted to police the reason he did it was because the teenager was part of a Republican extremist group. Sound familiar? Sound familiar at all? Why, it was only a couple of weeks ago that Joe Biden came out and said Maggie extremists are a threat to our democracy. And so here we are, a teenager. I don't know anything about this. Maybe there's some underlying story we don't know of. There's probably details we have not yet heard. But it's hard to find any reasonable explanation unless you want to get conspiratorial and start believing in wild speculative theories. It's hard to understand why a man would murder an 18-year-old because he was part of a Republican extremist group. What is a Republican extremist group anyway? I mean, he didn't say alt-right. He didn't say white supremacist. No, he just killed some kid. And it makes me worried that we are headed towards civil war. I've been reading a bit about it. I am no historian. Recently, this past weekend, I went down to Winchester, Virginia. It's not too far away, actually. And I went to Stonewall Jackson's headquarters. Now, admittedly, Stonewall Jackson has many headquarters. Yeah, it was not his home, but he did live there briefly. It was only a few months as he planned the defense of the Shenandoah area during the Civil War. I looked at the writings, I looked at the pictures and what people believed. And of course, in the lens of history, we see the South as evil, immoral, and in many ways, yeah. But slavery was an element of its time. And to those people, they believed it was just. I think we look back on that with justifiable disdain and disgust. But it's also important to realize that there were people in the Civil War who you probably, if you sat down with and discussed, be on the North or the South, you'd have a conversation with. And there are certainly people who have deep-seated immoral beliefs like slavery. But how would you really know that these people were doing something so dark if you just walked across them in the street? I guess what I'm trying to say is, no matter how dark and evil you think people are, I believe no one is beyond redemption. I believe that people continually strive to do better. And that even today, be it this Shannon Brandt, this murderer, if you walked up to him on the street, politics outside of everything, and talked about something like your favorite pizza, you'd probably get along. And then only then, when you learned the truth about who he was, would you realize the deep evil that is harbored within him. I don't know what else to say, I think we're headed towards a civil war. I think this is it. And I think this shows, well, I'll put it this way. Bill Burr recently appeared on the Trigonometry podcast where he said people are not as divided as you think. You go outside and people aren't fighting. He's wrong. He's completely wrong. He's 100% wrong. I've heard this sentiment. I've repeatedly said it is wrong. During the Civil War in the United States, do you think the people of New York were caning each other? No, the fighting was between disparate factions who did not live near each other. During the American Revolution, do you think the American revolutionaries were going to their neighbors in their towns and beating each other? They were fighting the regulars and, of course, loyalists, disparate factions. And of course, there are people who harbored certain sentiments even during the Revolutionary War. But the point is, war is fought where the two factions meet, such as in cities when protesters go to Chick-fil-A, or in North Dakota, where some unhinged liberal leftist type runs over an 18-year-old for being a Republican, or in his mind, part of an extremist Republican group. Let's go through this. Let's go through these stories. Right now, we have more reporters. A CBS reporter saying they fear civil war is on the horizon. The Bulwark writing how civil war could happen. Donald Trump's lawyers saying criminal charges may be coming. And a story like this, which people need to recognize, because we want it not to happen. There's a lot to break down philosophically and morally. Let's read the news. Before we get started, my friends, head over to timcast.com. Become a member if you would like to support the work that we do. As a member, you'll get access to our uncensored members-only shows on the Timcast IRL podcast Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m., as well as the Cast Castle vlog. We got a new show coming up for you tonight at 7 p.m. You don't want to miss it. funny, silly, and we're getting it better. We're figuring it out as we go. And of course, Tales from the Inverted World. And we're going to be launching a new Inverted World podcast show live with call-ins, exploring mysteries, the unexplained, creepy phenomenon. With your support, we're going to build culture. And hopefully, if we can't stave off the worst, hopefully from the ashes, we can still create a culture that believes in liberty, individual values, individualism, and personal responsibility. Here's the story from Inforum. Driver admitted to intentionally killing teen at North Dakota street dance party after political dispute. According to court papers, it was not an accident, but apparently a politically motivated attack. The fatal vehicle pedestrian incident happened early Sunday morning, September 18th in McHenry, North Dakota, about 120 miles northwest of Fargo and 54 miles north of Jamestown. Prosecutors allege moments before he was killed, 18-year-old Kaylor Ellingson called his mom to come rescue him because 41-year-old Shannon Brandt was chasing him in the city of McHenry, where the street dance had just wrapped up. By the time she could get there, her son was dead. I remember telling the story during the Black Lives Matter riots in, Provo, Utah. These extremists ran up to a car that was just driving down the street and they shot the driver. Just a regular random person. And you have these people who live under rocks saying it's not happening. It was Bill Burr who went on Joe Rogan's show and said, Joe, I don't know. I turn on the TV and they say, wear a mask or don't. I just, whatever. I do it. I know my Bill Burr sounds kind of like Fauci. That's what he said. He says, I don't know. I just turn on the TV and do what they tell me to do. And this is the guy who's now come out and said, people aren't divided. And only a few weeks later, a psychopath killed an 18-year-old after he left a dance party. By the time the mom got there, she found her son dead. Brandt was officially charged Monday with vehicular homicide and leaving the scene of a deadly incident. Quote, he was the one who called 911 to report the crash. Court papers showed Brandt called 911 around 2:30 a.m. Sunday and told the dispatcher that he just hit Ellingson, claiming the teen was part of a Republican extremist group and was calling people to come get Brandt after a political argument. Ellingson's mom told police her son called her just before the crash, asking if she knew Brandt, which she does. She does not believe her son knew him. We are still trying to determine what exactly transpired at the time of the crash and prior to that as well. Police say Brandt was drunk when he hit and killed Ellingson with his SUV in an alleyway. We do not know of any witnesses. We are still making attempts to interview potential witnesses from the street dance, people that were present prior to the crash happening. A judge ordered Brandt held on $50,000, which he objected, saying he's not a flight risk. I have a job, a life, a house, and things I don't want to see go by the wayside. Family that are very important to me. This is absolutely insane. He said it was because, right here, the pedestrian was part of a Republican extremist group. That's what he said. A political argument. A Republican extremist group. Here's a story over at timcast.com. Allegedly being part of a Republican extremist group, Brandt called 911 and confessed that he intentionally ran over Ellingson. He told the police they had gotten to an argument and that the teenager was part of a, quote, Republican extremist group. I give you Bill Burr, Outkick.com. They reported, Bill Burr shares blunt message about America being divided. Right now, there is a lot of pessimism in the U.S. And if you get on Twitter or any other social media platform, you start to think the country is falling apart. It really seems like we're in a nonstop cycle of negativity. However, Burr thinks people should go outside, soak up some fresh air, and realize things aren't as bad as you might think. You know, the way I see this, I'm standing atop a watchtower. From the watchtower, built tall, you can see many things, not everything, but you can see all around the hills. You can see down and throughout the land as to what may be happening. The tower was built specifically so that people might see things off in the distance that will come soon. From atop the tower, we see off in the distance people fighting. Not every single person. Of course, you see a town over here with a fire here and there. Over here, you see people fighting. Over there, you see some fighting. Over here, you see people celebrating. And we see the fighting spreading. Year after year, from atop the tower, we look down and say, there's fighting. There's more and more of it. They're getting crazy. Now that side's got a blue flag and that side's got a red flag. What happens when those sides crash? And we warn down to the people and we say, guys, please pay attention to this. I don't know what'll happen, but I'm telling you, I see these things off in the distance. And low there on the ground is Bill Burr. And he's like, what are you talking about? Down here at the ground, everybody's just drinking beer. Nobody's fighting. What are you talking about? Everything's fine. What are you crazy? And I'm like, bro, I'm up here looking over there. I just watched a dude run over some kid in an alley. It's happening, bro. And he's like, you crazy. Down here, everything's fine. He can't see it. And so he uses his loud voice and tells everyone how fine things are. Fine. I get it, man. We don't want to live in a world of despair. I don't want to read stories about some psychotic lunatic killing some kid. I don't want to read stories about some maniac beheading his significant other in the street. Or a guy in New York. Do you see this story? Bashing, just destroying property with an axe in McDonald's. And then they release him without bail. I don't want to read those stories. And maybe it's true. Maybe there is some reality to this, that we are atop the tower and we see too much. Maybe that fighting will never come to where we are. Or maybe it's important to recognize both messages. I think what Bill Burr is saying is ignorant, but not entirely wrong. Now, I'm critical of it because he is ignorant. I think it's fair to say, remain calm, remain steadfast, stand for what you believe in, but prepare. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. So as you have people, perhaps like me, standing on top of the watchtower, looking out, being like, hey guys, this looks serious. You can say, duly noted, man. We're not going to cry. We're not going to scream. We're going to make sure we are reasonably protecting ourselves, but we're going to carry on. We're going to keep calm. And I can respect that. But what I fear is that messages like this can leave people unprepared at the very least. He says, if you go on the internet, everybody seems like they're angry. But if you go outside and walk around, they're not. It's not like they're just walking around screaming at each other. No, I get what he's saying. But you need to understand, liberals aren't going to scream at liberals for the most part, and conservatives aren't going to scream at conservatives for the most part. But what happens when liberals meet Chick-fil-A? They scream. So they are. People on Twitter who are liberals sometimes yell at each other. Conservatives sometimes yell at each other. But overwhelmingly, you're not seeing on Twitter leftists yelling at leftists. I know we like to highlight the circular firing squad on the left, but not always. They're often saying, I agree, I apologize. So go to New York City and watch them go, oh, I didn't realize. Sorry about that. Go to a conservative area. Say the same thing. But look where the sides clash. And then you've got protests at the Boston Children's Hospital. Billboard Chris, he wears a billboard. He opposes transgender sex change surgeries for minors. And protesters and counter-protesters show up. Where the ideas clash, people are fighting. Bill Burr is wrong. He says, no, I just don't think any of that's real. It's just not real. It's not real? Bill Burr, how about this? How about this? It's not real. On Twitter, you don't die. On Twitter, they spit on you, figuratively. On Twitter, they call you naughty words. In real life, these psychopaths kill kids. That's what's happening. Republican extremists sound familiar? Biden warns that American values are under assault by Trump-led extremism. Trump-led extremism. We saw this. We knew it was going to happen. And Trump is not innocent here either. There are certainly people on the right. This is just the course that is before us. That's why I say civil war. Not here to say all Republicans are innocent. No, but there's the exception in the rules. On the right, you have libertarians, moderates, the politically homeless, along with conservatives. Certainly, we are upset with psychopaths running people over. Certainly, we are upset with what happens when people peacefully march to the street and Antifa shows up just beating them. Certainly, we are upset about what happened on January 6th. So we say no to violence. But Black Lives Matter, the left, embrace it, defend it. When Joe Biden comes out and says American values are under assault by Trump-led extremism, don't be surprised when his stochastic terrorism, as they call it, results in a dead kid. Man, it's just so brutal. You know, I see these memes where they say things like, you value guns more than kids. No, we don't. We value freedom, individual responsibility, protecting people. But y'all are psychopaths. Y'all are a cult. I think Trump's got his weird cult followers. I think that's not a good thing. I think there's a lot of bad things about it. Me, I like Ron DeSantis. I don't think he's perfect. And I think either way, you're going to get more of this hardship. Because I don't care if it's a Trump supporting kid or a Bernie Sanders supporting kid. The last thing I want to read about is some lunatic getting in an SUV and crushing he's 18. He's a young man. Reading stories like this, man. It doesn't have to be this way. But maybe that's just what humans are like. So they say. So they say stochastic terrorism that Trump encourages. When Biden comes out and screams this in this backdrop with this crazy photo, of course, the New York Times won't show the really scary photo with the red and the yelling. We have this from Mother Jones. How Trump spread incitement of violence throughout the GOP. This is from the November-December 2022 issue. Mother Jones just published this. And they say, just hours after the FBI entered Mar-a-Lago on August 8th to seize classified documents, blah, blah, blah. 3 days later, an Ohio man named Ricky Schiffer donned tactical gear armed with an AR-15, went to an FBI field office in Cincinnati. He tried to breach the facility, I guess with a nail gun, because he believed some stupid conspiracy theories from the internet. Not conspiracy theories, but misinformation about nail guns. He couldn't get through the bulletproof glass and fled, fired at them, ultimately died. Was Schiffer spurred to attack the FBI by statements from Trump and Gosar? It's hard to know. And that's no accident. Schiffer's actions point to a rhetorical method experts call stochastic terrorism, whereby a leader vilifies a person or group in ways likely to instigate random supporters to attack those targets. Okay. Yeah, we're screwed. Bill Burr. Look, I get it, man. You walk around and you see happiness, but you're ignoring the reality because you can't see it. Even Mother Jones calls this stochastic terrorism. Not specifically, but that's what it is. I'm not happy with the guy who went to the FBI field office. That's terrifying. It's psychotic. But what do you think this is? Is this not the same thing? This is why I say civil war. It's not because I'm saying one side is inherently more evil than the other. I think Democrats are ignorant, and I believe they have their evil. I believe it's exception versus the rule. So, it may be, to be fair, there is more evil on one side than the other, but it's not about that. What I'm saying is that both factions hate each other, and this only goes one direction. Stochastic terror. From the Daily Beast. CBS star reporter fears we're on the brink of a civil war. Holy crap, we are 85% there. Former Fox News staffer, they say. In the books written about the plot to steal the 2020 election and the violent insurrection that followed, it doesn't matter what they say anymore. Insurrection is meaningless to us, but to them it's gospel. They say none have led with a 50-year-old high school teacher from Bucks County, blah, 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 afraid of civil war. This is not something I've seen in the history of this country except for before the Civil War, said Bob Harvey, the chair of the Bucks County Board of Elections, in the pages of Big Truth, the new book from CBS News star Major Garrett, and elections expert David Becker. And it does scare me. I'm really worried we're approaching a precipice that's going to be impossible to come back from. We are already there. You want to play some games? How the second war could start? Oh, boy. But let's look at this. He says, what does he say? Something I've not seen in the history of this country. Plot to steal the election, the insurrection, blah, blah, blah. FBI whistleblower alleges January 6 cases manipulated to create illusion of national crisis. They're creating a civil war. The at times distressing book tells the story of how democracy survived an unprecedented assault in 2020, often through the election officials who served as its soldiers, featuring interviews with those in several pivotal states, blah, blah, blah. Civil war, he says. It was almost like the D-Day of elections, he says. After January 6th, David and I assumed that would be the ultimate moment in which everyone would have said, this is the abyss, and we will all walk back from this abyss in a bipartisan way. By the summer, it was clear that wasn't happening, and there was already a recasting and whitewashing of what January 6th was, and a concerted effort by some Republicans, oh, here we go, unable to accept their own role, unable to accept that, from at least where we are, the moderates, who do side with DeSantis and Trump more so than the left, condemn January 6th. They look to the most extreme and say, they won't condemn it. It's only going to get worse. Meanwhile, here I sit saying January 6th was bad. The people who are violent should be prosecuted. They say, oh, we don't care about you. You don't fill our gullet full of hate, so we'll ignore you or lie about you. I got an email from the Washington Post. They said, we're putting together a list of people who said Biden didn't win fairly, and you're one of those names. Care to comment? And I said, when did I say Biden didn't win fairly? Pretty sure that I get ragged on all the time by Trump supporters for saying that Biden won because people hate Trump. And they responded with, well, you said there was fraud in the past. And I said, I don't know to which tweet you're referring to and what I've referenced, because I've repeatedly said Biden won and that Trump supporters were too blind to realize that the enthusiasm against Trump was greater than the enthusiasm for Trump. And that predicted a lot. And so you know what they did? This Washington Post reporter sent me a list of tweets and said, here you go. Here's some tweets that you've said mentioning fraud. Do you stand by these? I understand you now say Biden won fairly. The tweets they sent me, one of them was like, GoFundMe accused of fraud. Elizabeth Holmes has been convicted of fraud. And I was like, some of these tweets were even me saying, I've never said widespread fraud resulted in this, that, or otherwise. I think Biden won. And I'm like, why are you sending me a list of tweets where I actually say Biden won fairly? It's because the media had what they want to write already, did no research, and then wanted to instigate, like they knew they wanted to accuse me of being an election denier. They didn't do any research. Then when I said, if you want me to comment, you've got to be specific, they had nothing to cite because it's a fake news story. This is why I think it's inevitable. Even someone like me can come out and say, prosecute the January 6th violent offenders, and Joe Biden won. And they go, nah, you're an election denier. They want the conflict or crisis, or at the very least, they don't care that they're continually shoveling us in that direction. Me, I try to say, please no, please stop, please don't do this. But it's impossible. When the corporate press just lies and lies and lies, then maybe that's where we're going. I wonder, the bulwark, how could the second civil war start? Interesting. They say during the 2022 campaign, national Democrats were bracing for a tidal wave that might eject them from control of the U.S. This in a state where blah, blah, blah. They say in Texas, a law passed that new restrictions on mail-in ballot access, blah, blah, blah. Of course, their perspective is all we should remove security efforts from our elections. In such an environment, many were worried about armed poll watchers, inflamed passions, and even possible violence. In Texas, voters saw unusually long lines in voting precincts, et cetera, et cetera. Before the March 1st, 2022 primary, voters in predominantly Democratic counties like Harris, Travis, and Bexar were seeing requests for mail-in ballots rejected at historically high rates. All right. Let's move on and say, how does it begin? Imagine a polling station in Texas on Election Day 2022. The location doesn't matter. Neither does the underlying dispute. What matters is a person came to the polls purportedly on the hunt for voter fraud. States like Texas had given poll watchers more latitude to move around polling places. A discussion escalated into confrontation, perhaps about the proper place to stand inside the polling precinct in relation to others, or about how to properly mark the ballot or use the ballot machine. I don't disagree with this assessment. After 2020, you have many people, a majority of Republicans, who believe the election was stolen. Do you think they'll just sit there? It's going to get bad. Someone's going to come in and they're going to say, that is not acceptable. There's going to be a fight. What happens? The police come, they'll have to shut down the polling place. What? I don't know, man. They say tragically things spun out of control. The person feared fraud was afoot and meant to stop it by any means. It first came through a raised voice, then physical intervention, and ultimately through a brandished weapon. Tensions and shouts ensued, followed by a scuffle. One shot rang out and a poll worker lay bleeding on the floor of a gymnasium. The polling place was a high school. As the blood pooled, the victim passed away. Simultaneously, a friend of the victim hit send on a video taken of the conflict and its horrible aftermath. The video, as these things do, flew faster than news coverage and became a national sensation. Raw emotions frayed further. I'll add to this. As the video goes viral, people on the right say this person was attempting to pass fraudulent ballots. The people on the left say a crazed Trump supporter just killed a poll worker. And there will be no truth. There will be no truth but perspective. The right will say it's true. The left will say it's true. And so be it. As Election Day played out in Texas, Democrats believed they were seeing some of their worst fears realized. The perception of long lines and disproportionate damage done to minority voters sparked genuine anguish and rage, now a death. I read a story once about, it was a tragedy. Two guys were driving. A guy was driving his car and got rear-ended. Rightfully, he was pissed off. He got rear-ended by a guy who clearly wasn't paying attention. Slowed down to a red light. The guy was going too fast. Boom, slammed into him from behind. The guy immediately jumps out of the car, angry. The guy who was hit. He's open carrying. He gets out of the car. The guy who hit him immediately gets out of the car. The guy who got hit starts yelling, "What are you, stupid? What are you doing yelling?" The guy who rear-ended him also is carrying a weapon. The man in front, he sees armed, and he says, hey, whoa, slow down there, buddy. Puts his hands on his hip. Back up. The angry man, we'll call him man A, who got rear-ended, sees the man putting his hand towards his gun, and he quickly grabs his gun and pulls it out, low ready. The man who we'll call him man B, who did the rear-ending, sees the guy draw his weapon, and so he pulls his out as well. As soon as he does, the man in front aims his weapon and says, "Put it down, don't do it." They both shot each other. It's a crazy story. Maybe it's apocryphal, maybe it's a legend. But I mean, it's reasonable. I read this on, I can't remember where, it was a long time ago. I wasn't reading activist information. I was just reading a story. And I thought about it and I'm like, it sounds reasonable. Like, I'm not saying, like, it sounds feasible, I should say. Not reasonable. It's completely unreasonable. But you have a guy who gets hit. Rightfully, he's angry. Jumps out of his car. And then this guy gets out, sees the guy's armed, and puts his hand at his hip and his hand up, which is a reasonable thing to do. Like, hey, buddy, don't do anything. I'm armed. But the guy saw his hand move towards his gun and assumed he was reaching for it. So he pulled his out. And that quickly just spiraled out of control. Things like that can happen. Think about that in the context of the election. What the Bulwark is saying, as much as I'm not a fan of them, they're not wrong. Someone in Texas, they're going to be armed. Not supposed to be armed near a polling place, but people are going to be outside. Someone's going to escalate. We just saw a man run over and kill a kid. That's not even an election. What do you think's going to happen when you've got Antifa and right-wing groups near polling places screaming? They're going to say, the death video, as they say, went viral, but not benignly so. It did not lead to more violence. But in the hours after it appeared, more people began taking weapons to polling places. There were standoffs. There were fistfights. Police and sheriff's departments nationwide were deployed. They say, or perhaps no such incident occurred. Maybe none was necessary to push the nation to the edge. In the months leading up to the November election, Trump and the circle of grifters surrounded him continued to push and profit from the big lie. It's funny because these people live in only one world, the big lie. Despite me saying insistently that Joe Biden legitimately won. Now, what I mean by that is, sure, the rules were changed. There were court cases unrelated to fraud challenging the constitutionality of mail-in voting and ballot boxes. What I mean to say is, I don't think they fabricated ballots and shipped them in the dead of night. I think that's stupid. Certainly, it's within the realm of like physical reality, but not probability. I think what actually happened is that Trump supporters underestimated the amount of hatred. They underestimated that the whole year had been shut down by a pandemic. They underestimated the media blamed Trump every step of the way, and that regular people who normally don't pay attention saw nothing but Trump misleading the country. And so they voted against him. Not to mention, I think there was ballot harvesting. I think they weren't doing signature verification to the same degree they had normally done. They pulled out all the stops, but it was done through procedure. You can't tell me. You can say that's illegitimate. It's like the votes were from real people. Okay, fraud exists. I believe there was a lot of fraud, but not enough to have altered the election. Because when I talked to these people, there were like 700 votes, and I was like, that wouldn't change anything. There were questions that never got answered. I think that's fair to point out. But I think too many people just couldn't believe that they would lose. I certainly thought Trump was going to do very well. And then I saw a skateboarder post a video about how he voted by mail. And I said, that's it. That's it. At any rate, they say Texas, as it turns out, was the fulcrum in the House of Representatives. Republicans, blah, blah, blah. Here we go. Here we go. You know, you get the point. They say something interesting. People are on edge. Look at this. Donald Trump's lawyers acknowledge the possibility of criminal charges against the ex-president and his aides in a new court filing. Trump gets arrested. I think the midterm elections are going to be terrifying. We're already hearing they're saying that the results won't be told on election night. This is dangerous. I repeatedly called for a clean election in 2020. That means you need to investigate and have a proper inquiry as to the claims made about voter fraud and impropriety. They didn't do it. The lawsuits, which were not about fraud, like in Texas, were thrown out. That terrifies me. Because that meant the next election that came through, people would not believe them. They would have no confidence. Now you're telling me
that on the midterm, during the midterms, you're not going to give us the results on election night. The Constitution prescribes 1 day for the election. So what's going to happen? The overwhelming majority of Trump supporters and Republicans who question the 2020 election, yeah, they're going to be watching this. And when they see there's no legitimate results, there's no final results, they're going to say no. And then what happens, I don't know. But I think things are going to start breaking down, especially after the midterms. I think the Bulwark makes a good point. Why would we not see some kind of escalation? Why would we not see Republicans outside of every polling place keeping an eye out for vans at 3 a.m? There were a lot of accusations made about ballots coming in at 3 a.m. Why would we not see this time around Trump supporters and conservatives en masse at every polling station camping throughout the night? People are probably already talking about doing it, making sure no vehicles are coming in. And then what happens? There was a video, this really frustrates me, of a van pulling up to a location where they're counting ballots. And then they bring in some boxes. And then everyone's like, they're shipping in ballots. It would turn out to be like burgers. It was like ham sandwiches because people were working throughout the night and they brought in food. And there were a lot of people who thought it was like ballots or something. What happens when a catering truck pulls up for a couple dozen poll workers? And there's going to be Republican poll workers. What happens when that van pulls up and people say, they're doing it again? And then there's Antifa there. And then what happens when they fight and they smash one of the things open and then lo and behold, they find a bunch of sandwiches? What then? You know, I worry about where things are going. And this stuff breaks my heart. I couldn't believe it when I saw this story. I mean, the reality is I could believe it, but I was just pissed off. That's what I want to say. It's just some kid, man. Why would you kill him? Killed him. Look, when it came to Aaron Danielson in Portland, we knew that there were Trump supporters marching and hooting. And the Antifa guy hunted him down. And we were mad about that. It was unjustified. And we knew it was political. We knew that Antifa, this BLM guy, hunted down Aaron Danielson and killed him. 2 to the chest. We got one. Bang, bang. It's insane. This, as bad as that was, this is just some kid. Man. Trump said dark days. Dark days indeed. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 8 p.m. tonight over at youtube.com/TimcastIRL. Thanks for hanging out. And I'll see you all then.